Miracles of Today, Chapter 2, Episode of the Moths. Isn't it strange that princes and kings and clowns that caper in sawdust rings and common folks like you and me are builders of eternity? To each is given a bag of tools, a shapeless mess and a book of rules, and each must make, ere life is flown, a stumbling block or a stepping stone. R. L. Sharp. Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? Mark 4:40. It was spring, a very wet and soggy spring. My cottage at Cedar Lake was situated, for the time being, in a quagmire. The road, which had been merely a mud path through the field, had seemingly disappeared. My quiet cottage was not within a subdivision with well-macadamed roads, not even with gravel paths. In fact, it was a half-mile or more from the lake, and I contented myself with being on the shoulder of a ravine through which usually there trickled a small stream, now a raging torrent. Our peaceful little brook was now swollen with seasonal rains, although that spring the rains were unusually heavy. The screens on the cottage had weathered more seasons than such materials were ever meant to stand for. In fact, they were now moth-eaten, rust-eaten, or is flea-bitten a better term? The reason I call your attention to the screens and the screened-in porch is because they provided no protection during such weather, but rather became further depleted and hung in their frames like old lace, tattered and full of holes. They could not be repaired. My landlord had said, "Later on, I'll get new ones for you." Meanwhile, the insects, especially mosquitoes, June bugs, and moths, made the most of the situation. My cottage evidently was their convention headquarters, so when I returned from town, they took further advantage of the lights, swarming about in such masses that they almost obscured the lights altogether. My one solace was that while they seek the light, they destroy themselves in the use of it. Yea, even the black forces use it, the light, destructively, and so become engulfed and destroy themselves by the very poor power they misdirect. These thoughts may be a solace of sorts, but it does not lessen one's disgust at finding himself in the midst of a bug convention, when the pests persist in getting into things and places where they are not wanted, like ears and eyes and mouth and hair and food. On the evening in question, they even got under my skin, as the saying goes, and I complained rather bitterly to my teacher when next I went to class. That beloved person smiled at me cryptically and replied with amused tolerance, "Better do something about that." When I returned to my cottage that night and turned on the lights, lo, not a bug put in an appearance. My teacher had known what to do and had done it. Believe me, I thanked my God presence for the fulfillment of that decree. Now it is one thing to have a manifestation made for you, and quite another to do it yourself, and to sustain it, especially if you have talked and boasted about it, thus diminishing your forces. Jesus says, "Tell no man." This is an admonition to tell God, not man. Rather, thank God, and tell no man. Well, in my exuberance over the victory over the pests in the cottage, and to show those of my scoffing friends and acquaintances how great and beautiful was the law, I made the fatal mistake of talking, yea, boasting of it. One friend decided to return to the cottage with me, for he had half a mind to join this group under my teacher. Also, he wanted to see results for himself. When he saw the dilapidated condition of the screens, he mentioned them. All the way from the city to the lake we had talked on various subjects, as friends do. Yet, at intervals, I silently gave thanks that the light which had so lovingly brought about my miracle would be sustained. My friend sat in my living room and read The Life and Teachings of the Masters by Spalding, while I became absorbed in Dweller on Two Planets. The night was stuffy, so I opened the windows and the front door. Better have moths than swelter, I thought. Yet at the same time I thanked God and decreed that He sustain the light screen which kept them out. Asking forgiveness for any doubts in my consciousness, which were as the holes in my screens, I returned to my book and was soon absorbed. My friend, however, kept looking about the room as though he were pondering what he read, though in an abstract way. I noticed this action, yet didn't record it to the extent that it interfered with my interest in the book, which held my attention so powerfully. After an hour or more, my friend gazed about the room again, and triumphantly announced that there was a moth, a big one. One moth. May God, whom I believe laughs at our miserable use of His great laws, forgive us for criticizing Him. One moth instead of 1,000, and we point at it with fiendish glee and say, "Look, God, you didn't do a good job. One moth got through." So in order that that part of the human would be silenced forever, and to acknowledge God as the miracle-working presence which makes no mistakes, I said with considerable feeling, "Thou great grand architect of the universe, God, I thank Thee for Thy manifestation in which only one moth remains in this house. But my friend here is troubled tonight over the one, as I was several nights ago over 1,000,000, more or less. You take command. If Thy power be great enough to take care of the many, reveal to him that it can also take care of the one. So be it." My friend watched that moth circle the light once more, and then settle down on the hem of the curtain, just where it was fastened to the top of the window. There it remained while I pretended to be absorbed in my book, but in reality decreeing with all the feeling at my command. But he couldn't resist the human impulse of reminding me that the moth was still in the house. From within me came a deep knowing, and I asked him to remove it or chase it out. My friend took hold of the curtain and shook it, but instead of flying away, the moth fluttered to the floor, its wings crumbling to pieces as it fell. He remarked, "That's funny, it's dead." There is nothing funny about it at all. God's laws are immutable, unalterable, unchangeable, and eternal. They work if you do your part. If you expect God to do something, ask and you shall receive. Do not for an instant permit yourself to believe that God does anything by halves. If He gets rid of the bugs, He gets rid of them all, not just half, nor yet all but one. That one moth was a doubt through which the entire manifestation could have been shattered. By my stand of persistence, He took charge, and the manifestation was then complete. Stand with God. One with God is a majority.